All right, well, we'll get started. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We're excited to have you here, excited about this conversation. Just to set a little bit of context, skills-based hiring is something that we're all hearing a lot about, right? And the concept seems pretty simple. Identify the skills that are needed for a particular job, evaluate candidates based on their evidence of those skills, and go from there. But currently, we use degrees as a proxy for a lot of those skills. And so the goal in shifting to more of a skills-based hiring system is to expand more opportunity for more people to get into good jobs, and particularly people who have the ability and the capacity to do jobs. And that expands the available talent pool for good jobs, which is of critical importance right now because labor trends tell us that there are more than two job openings in the US for every unemployed worker. So figuring out how we get the right people in the right jobs, increase job satisfaction, and ultimately increase retention is of utmost importance for our employers. So I'll add, too, that some of the views that employers have about this emphasize that they want to make this shift. Over 80% believe that skills are better than degrees at determining job fit. Over 70% do not think that degrees serve as a good proxy for skills. And yet, over 50% are still hiring from degree programs. So one of the things that we'll be talking about is why there's this gap and what is making this so hard. And part of it is that a key component of the skills that degrees serve as proxy for are what we have traditionally called soft skills. We won't use that term again today. And those have been harder to both teach and assess, and typically aren't as explicit in our education system. So that's going to be a key component of what we're talking about today. And one of the pieces of feedback or responses that we frequently get when we talk about this in an education setting is, wait, that sounds great, but I am too busy, I'm already over capacity, I don't have room to add one more thing. And we hear that and feel that. And so we want to just acknowledge that up front. We fully anticipate there's some skepticism sitting here in the room. We welcome that. And we want to address not only what this paradigm shift means for us in the education system, but also that very relevant concern. So with that, I'll do a quick introduction of this group up here. We have Mike Flanagan, who's the CEO of Mastery Transcript Consortium. We have Ashley Hemme, who is the Director of Social Responsibility for ASA, Corporate Social Responsibility for ASA. And we have Tim Taylor, who's the co-founder and president of America Succeeds. They'll all give you a little bit more info about what they do in context as they jump into the conversation. I'm Courtney Riley. I'm the co-founder of SkillsLine, a technology company that offers an online suite of durable human skills micro lessons and professional learning that supports getting these skills explicitly into the classroom. So with that, I will start us off by asking, what is it that employers are looking for today when it comes to skills? And maybe I'll let Tim get us started with that question.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this session. Hope to make this enjoyable and educational at the same time. So. I am the co-founder of America Succeeds. We work at the intersection of business and education. We work with a lot of employers on the demand side of what they're looking for as kids come through the pipeline. And we work with a lot of the education systems trying to help education systems become more agile, responsive to those needs, and how that might work out for the mutual benefit of the kids, society, and making sure we create upward mobility for the students who are coming through that pipeline. I think largely in response to the question, employers are looking for some combination of technical and durable skills that can make you successful and create a path to economic opportunity and success in life. And I think everybody in this room can recognize the combination of those two that you've developed over the course of your career. You take technical skills, you might learn technical skills for certain jobs, but you have a set of durable skills like communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and then also how you show up in the world, character, metacognition. And those durable skills last your entire life. You bring those from job to job, regardless of what you're going to do. They're required in every single industry, in every geography, and regardless of your education attainment level. And so while we know there's a lot going on right now around an explosion of post-secondary opportunities for kids who may not go on and get a 4-year degree, sometimes validating the quality of those programs is very different. And at the same time, you're going to need to be able to demonstrate some of those durable skills which employers ask for. I bet everybody in this room has heard some employer say, give me somebody who can think critically, collaborate, and I'll teach them what they need to know. And so how do you make sure that kids have these durable skills? We'll talk a lot more about that as we dig in on the panel, but America Succeeds has done a lot of original research on this. We have quite a bit of thought and partnerships from all over the country that we've been working on this, and all of you probably have a coaster on your seat with a QR code that can tell you a little bit more about it too, a souvenir for you to take home as well.
And, we love the concept and the terminology of durable skills. It makes sense. But, speaking for the education system more broadly, there are so many different terms out there for this generally same set of skills. Can you talk a little bit about, how to understand all of those different terms, how to think about it, and how we can start getting to a point where we all know what we're talking about as we try to make this a more formal part of our education system?
Is that for me? Great. Okay. So hi, everybody. I'm Mike Flanagan. I lead a nonprofit organization called the Mastery Transcript Consortium. And the best way to understand MTC is to think of us as a coalition of innovative schools. And what our schools are trying to do is create a model of high school that's more engaging, it's more purpose-driven. It has more opportunities for real-world learning through things like projects, capstones, experiential team-based, inquiry-based learning. And the initial challenge we were set up to do was solve for school leaders was to how do you credential learning that doesn't look like traditional high school? Right? How do you capture and credential skills that don't appear on traditional high school transcripts? There is value in courses and grades and GPA, but it's a very narrow value. It's a pretty reductive way of thinking about what education is. And so our job was to try to widen the aperture and expand the horizon of what we capture in those high school experiences. And that leads us to Courtney's question of what are we talking about when we talk about these skills? I think one of the reasons we're really huge fans of the work of America Succeeds is that it's a research-driven project, right? It looks at what employers are actually looking for and hiring for, and then allows us to sort of use that as a target. For us, I think, I would take a step back and say there's going to be a lot of sessions even here at this event where we're going to talk about the future in 10, 20 years from now and how AI is going to solve all this, right? At some point, the big machines will look at all of our resumes and our portfolios and they'll just tell us who's qualified and who isn't. But right now, we're in the messy phase. The transition phase. And I think if we have one sort of design principle, it's that embracing the mess is good. It's good that our schools right now are engaging in backwards design and coming up with their own locally driven definitions and scales for what these skills look like. It's good that we're enlisting and recruiting young people in the definition of those same skills. I think too often school is an exercise in telling young people what to do, and for young people it's an exercise in doing what they're told and getting really good at it. So I think for us, the models that we're most interested in are ones in which we're actually asking learners to take more agency, more of the reins when it comes to their own skill building, and consciously reflect on what they're doing, and to give us feedback on that too. A word we use a lot in our work is hypothesis. We're constantly testing things, And the whole point of that is that some of them don't work. Some of them aren't going to last. There are definitions our schools are using right now for some of these skills that will not survive the test of time, and that's a good thing. And 2-3 years from now, we'll have better ones.
Yeah, that's great. Ashley, I don't know if you're seeing something similar in your work, and as you look kind of across all of the organizations that ASA works with.
Yeah, so hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Ashley Hemme, I'm the Director of Corporate Social Responsibility at ASA. We probably look familiar because we're on your lanyards, we're on the posters outside. We're really happy to be here as a sponsor. And so we are a national nonprofit located in Boston, Massachusetts, focused on helping students learn about themselves, learn about their options, and make informed decisions about their future. And we do this in a number of ways. We do this through digital initiatives, we do this through advocacy work, and we also do it through philanthropy, and that's the work that I lead. And I'll also add that I came to the nonprofit space right from the classroom. I was a middle grades teacher for a number of years before then entering ASA. And so what we've seen kind of across the board is the work is kind of happening in school districts and in nonprofits. We see some project-based learning happening, some collaboration, some problem solving, but it's usually done on kind of special occasions. So when you're thinking about like early release days, when kids are like bouncing around and you can't really move to the next set of standards, right? So you'll have a project that they do. Or project showcases or end-of-unit activities, things that happen at the local YMCA, maybe after school and occasionally. But it's not necessarily ingrained throughout the school day because teachers are often bogged down by standards. Nonprofits are often bogged down with many other logistical things that they need to take care of. And so across the board, we see a little bit of it happening, and everyone's kind of starting there, but just as Mike mentioned, there's no kind of universal language that's being used by practitioners right now, and that makes it really difficult when it comes to communicating and working with each other and proposing to your administration that you want to incorporate more durable skills work in your instruction.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Our standard, our typical subjects in school, math, reading, science, we have those standards, curriculums, assessments. We know how to teach those, right? And we have a long history of experience, or a long experience of history doing that. And so with these durable skills, that's not there. And so trying to figure out how we actually teach them is a key part of that messiness that we're in right now. At SkillsLine, we think it's really important to do the exact same thing that we do for those other subjects and break down these skills into their foundations, just like we would do for math or reading. But that's not necessarily... There aren't a whole lot of tools and resources out there. So what are you all seeing in terms of supports for teachers and for schools in actually making this shift? How do we make sure that they're equipped to do this?
Well, I'll first start before sharing some resources that are out there. And there are resources out there, but sometimes they're really difficult to find. And and I'll mention again, when I left the classroom, this was 2019, pre-COVID. So in conversations with educators right now and what school districts are facing with high turnover rates and everything else, it is exhausting to find additional resources to kind of borrow and steal like you always have to kind of do and put it all together. I think the issue also is we keep putting the work on the backs of classroom educators, and we need systems and policies to kind of catch up to then continue to support educators. So part of that means we need to remove barriers. So number one issue is always time, right? How do you incorporate this especially in core instruction areas? Time is really difficult when you're faced with standards and assessments and you have to kind of deal with that. You can have a supportive administration that removes some of those barriers, but still you're kind of forced to meet the needs of what the State Department or what is required kind of nationally for schools. I'll also say meaningful professional development is really critical to kind of reduce that kind of language barrier that's happening between employers and educators right now. So it's important for educators to understand and practitioners, so I'll use educators kind of broadly here. I'm using it to incorporate classroom teachers, school leaders, district administrators, and practitioners who are in out-of-school organizations. They are educators. They educate young people. And so it's important for them to understand why this is important, how students could use this, and how do they explain this to the other caring adults in that child's life. So whether it be family members, or mentors. So you need to be able to share that and advocate for that student to make sure that you're incorporating that within the school building. So in addition to removing those barriers, right, there are resources that are out there, and there are some really amazing organizations doing some really great work. So you have like your Project Lead the Ways that have full units that districts can purchase essentially, and they're engineering units where students can build prototypes, and that's really built within a science classroom. ASA is a partner of the Association for Middle Level Education, and so we've really worked together to create this playbook focused on middle school career exploration. So how do we start even younger with teaching students about durable skills, having them learn about resilience and problem solve? There are others that have curriculums that are ready to download and are free to be used. So ASA has a middle grades curriculum. Jobs for the Future has some curriculums that can be used. NXU has a really phenomenal curriculum that is focused on passion and identity building. And so kind of putting those all together, which again takes time, there are resources out there for educators to access.
Yeah, I would just quickly build on what Ashley was saying. You know, I think we have the benefit of all the discussion we're having today and at this event about skill building for young people is happening in a larger national context around education innovation, particularly around personalized competency-based learning, competency-based education. You can choose your own acronym. There's like a lot of ones you can choose from, and they're all generally going in the same direction. And there's amazing service organizations that are providing, even as we speak, deep on-the-ground technical assistance to states and districts. Organizations like KnowledgeWorks, at a policy level, the Aurora Institute is incredibly valuable in terms of tracking the adoption of CBE across all 50 states, and also, you know, contributing definitions and articulations of what good looks like for that work. Learner-centered collaborative, Transcend, Big Picture Learning Network is here, XQ Institute, and so I think if there's one sort of note of optimism, it's that part of this mess, and I think I'm becoming the mess guy, but part of the mess is the healthy like biodiversity of a lot of really thoughtful people that are testing and doing the work on the ground as we speak. So just out of curiosity, who here is from a K12 institution? Okay, oh, awesome, okay, great. So, and how many of those folks who had your hands up, how many of you are in a district or in a state where there is some kind of initiative around what I just described as PCBL or competency-based education? All right, so that's about like 10%-ish. That feels right. For the other 90% of you, I guess the thing I would try and leave you with is that the resources are there. The work is happening, even though it might be called different things in your state.
Can I pick up on that just for a second? I think it's the why and how a little bit are the two things. And so America Succeeds had the hypothesis that all employers needed this, and that there wasn't anybody that we know in society who won't need these types of skills. So what we did is we took you see the diagram on the coaster, right? We came up with 10 terms that are pulled from 21st century skills, soft skills, anything we could find. We didn't make these terms up. We started with those terms that we could find. And then what we did is we actually came up with 10 synonyms for each term. So around the outside of that wheel, there are 10 other terms. So come up with 100 terms. We went with a company called MC Burning Glass, and we ran those 100 skills through 80 million job descriptions between 2020 and 2021. And what we found was 7 of the top 10 skills in demand across all 80 million job descriptions were these durable skills. The top 5 durable skills were in demand almost 5 times more often than the top 5 technical skills. Makes sense because you're spreading the technical skills across different industries, but if you're looking at healthcare or if you're looking at manufacturing or hospitality, it doesn't matter. We know that these are the skills that are required to be successful, and we also know that for low-income students, students of color, and others, these skills are even more important as they get to the starting line of the workforce to create economic opportunity and good jobs for the future. So the second piece of that then is how. Where is this happening? What does this look like? A lot of great examples. Corey Moen at CAPS Network, Blue Valley CAPS is doing great work on this too. But we also recognize that this is difficult, and to say to teachers and other folks, this is the type of thing that has to be taught in the classroom without the tools and supports is impossible. And what we do know for sure is that this is not fit into a Carnegie unit and you add a critical thinking course, a collaboration course, and these other types of things. Wouldn't be really clear on that, but there are some folks who have immediately resisted because of the time constraints and the way that we think about teaching these things. The most innovative things we get back from educators, and we say, well, how would you think about doing this? And my favorite example is a math teacher who said, I got it. I'm going to give a math problem. It doesn't matter whether I give a math problem for a third grader or somebody who's in high school. I can use this across the entire spectrum. I'm going to ask a group of kids to get together in small groups to solve problems multiple ways. And then I'm going to ask each kid to come up and present how they solved one of the problems using one of the methods they did. And instantly, a math teacher is teaching collaboration, critical thinking, problem solving, and communication skills. And I think that is ultimately the idea, and some of what we're all advocating for, what we're all thinking about, how we're thinking the education systems have to evolve, is to keep doing the curriculum that is provided, not to change all of those things, but to make sure that these are embedded in everything that a kid is doing throughout the day in every one of their classroom subjects.
And one thing that I'll just add to that is the metacognition piece of that is also super important. So a teacher has supported students to actually exhibit those skills, and then needs to make sure that they know what those skills are that they've just exhibited, so that they can actually say, well, I just used collaboration and communication and problem solving, and here's how I used them. And I think that kind of brings us to another point around these skills, which is that they're not skills that are just learned in formal education, right? These are life skills, and many students all students are developing them outside of the school building as well. But that recognition is a really important piece to make them kind of the valuable skills that employers are looking for. And so I wonder if you all can talk a little bit about how to think about gaining these skills formally versus other avenues, informal learning, home learning, anything else. And then how we think about the perception of value that's attached to those, and how we might move forward to make them all have the same level of value when it comes to moving into the workforce.
Well, so I'll start with the K12 space a little bit. We went through a massive educational disruption from the last couple of years, and we're still going through that. And I think what a lot of schools are facing right now is, what areas do we still incorporate of what we've noticed through this kind of virtual model that had existed? How do we move on from here, take those best practices, but still be in the school building? And how do we have that reflect the future of work right now? That's something that organizations and employers are grappling with. Is often there are folks who work some hybrid kind of work environment, right? So they're in the office and working, but then they're working from home. And that requires a lot of different kind of skills, and we're talking about 21st century skills right here. And so I think it's important in the K-12 space to think, and broadly too, to think about this disruption and this mess, right, as opportunity to kind of expand and grow from there. So I'll say too with that, ASA has partnered with Jobs for the Future on a report, and in that report we analyzed 400 different career pathways. And there's some formalized in-person models that we see, apprenticeships, like boot camps, but the best practices we realized were a hybrid approach that incorporated multiple models and methods. So what we have really learned at ASA is there's this full ecosystem of opportunities for students to access. There's K12 education, what's there, and what educators are still grappling with what would we take and what do we go with. But then there's also resources like educational products that students can use directly through their phones. There's after-school programs that help students build up their networks and social capital. All of that really put together helps create this greater opportunity that really matches the future of the workforce, and that's really necessary now for young people as they move on through middle school into high school and make those decisions about post-secondary pathways.
I liked your question, Courtney. You were asking sort of the where question, like where are these skills developed? I would take a step back briefly to say, to me, some of the questions that inform the where are who and when. And what I mean by that is, who in your school, which kids should be developing these skills? The answer should be all of them, right? Like I hope if we could agree on one thing, that should be it. All kids should have the opportunity to develop these skills. And to do so starting now. But then if we think about our traditional education models, the exact opposite is true. Too often we think of high school as a tracking system where kids who are going to develop these higher order critical thinking skills and communication skills we characterize as college bound. And our job is to prepare them for college so that then when they get to college, they can develop these skills for real. And then we also have kids who are on a vocational track where we're not going to develop these skills. We're going to focus on technical skills. Okay, we're going to focus on certificates and things that will prepare them for the job. And our schools, like if we have like one thing that unifies them, it's that we just think that's flat wrong. That what we need to do is think about models where all kids are working on developing these higher order skills right now. And the beauty of that is it's one of these very rare things where it's a true win-win. The kids who do aspire to go to college are going to be given a toolkit of critical thinking skills that will serve them really well there. And more importantly, they'll actually have a sense of what they might want to do when they're there. And the kids who are going to perhaps explore a different pathway, a learn and earn program, a path to a job that doesn't require a four-year degree right now, aren't thinking of that trajectory as somehow less than. And I think that's a really powerful benefit of creating learning spaces like Corey's, like some of the ones we've been talking about, that serve both of these kids really well. So I think the where question, which is in high school and also outside, is informed by those other two really important design principles as well.
Yeah, those are great answers. I don't have a lot to add except on the purpose of who needs these. Every student who is going to get a job. And I think that I would take that just a little bit further. The analysis that we did around the need for these skills, we tried to look ahead to what folks consider the jobs of the future. And in high skill, high wage jobs, these skills are the most in demand. They're the least likely to be replaced by AI. In the lowest skill, lowest wage jobs, these are the least in demand. So when we think about who needs these skills, anybody who wants a mid-skill, mid-wage, or a high-skill, high-wage job are the kids who better start developing these skills because they're the most difficult for our AI or for the other things to come along and do that somebody could, if the kids can't do them.
Yeah, absolutely. Which kind of leads to then, how do we know when kids have these, right? What are the signals? And I think one of the interesting things to think about is what does it mean for a 12-year-old to have some of these and be developing them versus a 16-year-old versus a 20-year-old? And what is it that we're actually looking for when we talk about these skills that are lifelong skills that we're all currently developing and will continue to develop for the rest of our careers, right?
So I'll share a little bit about the other brand on the coasters that are out there is CompTIA. Some of you may be familiar with CompTIA, Computer Technology Industry Association. CompTIA gives certifications for tech skills. They're the second largest certifier of tech skills behind Microsoft. So if you have a C++ or a cybersecurity or a Python certificate, most often CompTIA is one of the two that's sort of considered the gold standard for this. CompTIA has been asked many times about kids who are having these tech certifications, whether or not they have the durable skills to go along with it, to work with the customer, to collaborate on the tech projects they're doing, right? It's not enough just to have the tech certifications. It's not enough to have just any certification without these types of tools. But what we did is, together with CompTIA, we just recently brought a group of what we call subject matter experts together, basically employers. It was Amazon, Johnson & Johnson, Discover Card, Leidos. We had a number of folks, and then a number of young people who were in their first career. And we created a rubric around what somebody should be able to know or do in their first job, within the first year of their first job, using these young people who were in their first jobs and employers who were looking to hire or who manage at this level. So that we had a common lexicon, and when somebody says we need critical thinking, we all can look at a rubric and say, here's what we mean by that, here's what you should be able to know or do. And the goal, ultimately, CompTIA is going to use that around certifications for folks in the workforce. The opportunity is to back that up to potentially post-secondary, high school, middle school, to say, are kids on track to be able to develop those skills that we know they're going to need when they get into the workforce? We're very early on in that phase. One of the things we're trying to do is talk to a lot more educators about what you're seeing, how you might teach these skills. We're trying to get some feedback on whether or not the employers got it right. But again, it's from the employer side. We wanted very much a demand-driven approach to this, because this is exactly who we're trying to feed the kids into the system and to make sure they're able to succeed and do the skills that employers are asking for. So we're getting there. And one of the things that I would say also is that this isn't pass-fail. You don't pass-fail any of these skills. You work on these skills your entire life. We'll keep getting better at these, hopefully, as we go through life. But there is a spot in which, to be able to be successful in the workforce, you sort of have to be at the minimum. And so what we're hoping is that the idea is that we can let kids know what they're good at or what they have to practice. And when we get to these skills-based hiring opportunities, kids can lead with their strengths. They know which terms to put on a resume. They know what to say that they're able to do. They're able to demonstrate the types of skills that they have. We all lead with our strengths on our resumes. On a skill-based resume, it just doesn't lead with the degree. And then they have to find some other way to put strengths in there.
To add to that, I would also say, like, the communication piece is critical for young people to understand. So there's the mastery of it, but then being able to communicate it, to identify it. And I first want to acknowledge, too, that there's an equity gap in the workforce, and there's an equity gap when we're talking about young people. And so what we see time and time and again is female-identified students, students of color, Black and brown students, LGBTQ plus students are less likely to look at a job posting and see their own skills reflected in that, and are less likely to communicate and advocate for themselves. So it is really critical that we really kind of meet them with that and help them learn how to communicate that, understand where their mastery is, where their interests are. One of ASA's biggest measures that we look at across all of the programs we support is confidence. And that is key for young people to be able to speak to the work they do and be able to go into a place, talk to an employer, ask for an internship or apprenticeship, or apply for a job in the first place.
I would just briefly build on that. So the how do we know question is really an assessment question, right? And so in the specific case of high schoolers, what does good assessment look like if we're going to move beyond the kinds of multiple choice and timed essay writing that unfortunately have informed way too much of assessments and to which we're kind of held captive in a lot of different ways. So if you're on your devices now, the first thing I would say is just Google or search for Learning Policy Institute and Authentic Performance Assessment. They've got a whole framework and a whole point of view on what authentic performance assessment looks like in practice for high schoolers. And it's going to be a lot of really good things like, capstones, projects, portfolio defenses. For me, my shorthand of it, this is my language, not theirs, is that really good authentic assessments are synthetic. they're constructive, and they're recursive. And here's what I mean by that. By synthetic, I don't mean artificial. I mean requiring synthesis, requiring students to demonstrate multiple skills at once, as opposed to artificially segmenting them into things in this discipline or that. Yeah, we have to argue with data and analysis, and also communicate effectively, in speech and writing all at once, right? That's kind of like the human condition. So that's one first thing. The second, which, what did I say, was recursive? The last one was recursive. What was the one in the middle? I already forgot the one in the middle. So constructive. Yeah, young people should be given authority to choose and own a lot of what they're being tested or assessed on. The counterexample of this is really clear. I don't know if any of you recall kind of high school chemistry class, right? But you would do a lot of these chemistry labs where they were basically cookbook science, right? Like, hey, we're going to get together and we're going to add A plus B, and surprise, it equals C. Surprise, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Like, there's zero discovery because the outcome is preordained, right? And the kinds of assessment opportunities we want young people to have are ones where they're owning a lot of this project work. You don't know what the right answer is going to be. They may even get to the end and not have achieved the right answer, but they are still going to learn a lot along the way. And that's where that recursion comes in. All of the learning models, if there's one sort of principle of like mastery learning that we think is really essential, it's that in mastery learning models, learning begins with the assessment. Whereas in traditional models, too often, the assessment is considered to be the end of the learning path. So it's precisely when you are assessed, when you get that feedback, that you can reflect on it as a learner and make conscious choices about where you're going to go next, whether it's taking the project in a new direction, revising the piece of work you're doing. And it's that loop, that recursive loop, is what develops in our kids that metacognition that Courtney was talking about earlier, right? That sense of the spatial awareness of like, where am I as a learner? Where am I going? What are my strengths? What are the things I'm still working on? And if we put that then in the context of demonstrating to employers, right? Hey, what can you do? There's nothing more impressive in an interview when you're talking to a young person who says, I'm pretty good at these things. These are pretty well-established skills, but honestly, I'm still working on this one. I'm a work in progress in these particular areas. When you have young people who can, speak that articulately about themselves and what they're doing and why, they just like kind of radiate competence in all kinds of different environments.
A quick anecdote that I can't resist sharing is we had one employer who came back and said, if I can comment on anything in the education space, it's that they give kids all the information they'll ever need to solve the problems that they're asking them to solve. And as soon as they get into the workforce, they'll never have all the information they need to solve the problem that they're trying to solve. And it's those gaps and the critical thinking and the other things that go along with that, and some of the way that you were just sharing that it works.
All so true. There were so many wonderful nuggets in all of what you all just shared. It occurs to me that one of the things that we're talking about here is that there's really two components. There's first an awareness of the skills, and then there's demonstration of the skills. And those should be getting developed together at the same time, and it's very much a reflective process that cycles through and develops over time. And so there may actually be different ways of assessing both of those two that help us to figure out what our students need and how we meet them where they are. And so I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how we think about those two pieces, especially when we're talking about students who start at very different places when it comes to these skills.
I'll just chime in briefly with an anecdote, because I think that you can't hit a target you can't see, right? And too often for development of some of these skills, we've treated them as these sort of ineffable, kind of you know them when you see them sorts of things. So I was on a Zoom call the other day. So a lot of what we do at MTC is we advocate with our schools on behalf not of specific kids, but on behalf of like our transcript, like our mode of assessing kids when they apply to college. And so we wind up talking to enrollment managers and admissions offices. So I was on the Zoom call with the team from West Point. And they were skeptical. Like, we've got this learning model. It doesn't have grades or GPA or credit hours. And these are folks who believe in command and control. So, they're kind of like, okay, hippy-dippy guy, like, why would we want to look at this model? And, but, there's a point in the discussion, I said, look, let me just throw a concept out to you. Our schools believe that leadership can be taught explicitly. They have definitions for it, and our kids are working to that. Do you, folks at West Point, do you agree that leadership can be taught? And they're like, okay, yeah, we do, sort of what we do. So I think that it's one simple anecdote, but this idea of like, if you put a name to things that you value in your schools and you create really good scales and structures to help kids make progress towards them, then they can do it. The challenge is that too often from an equity perspective, we've simply assumed that some kids will just kind of pick it up on the fly. And then not surprisingly, the kids who do pick that stuff up on the fly are kids who already have a lot of privilege and a lot of things going for them already. And so our opportunity to kind of have a real leveling effect in a powerful way, to give kids a boost, is to make it really clear like where the bar is for all of our kids and give them the means and tools to get there.
So I saw a lot of K12 hands up, so you'll probably nod along with me when you think about how the pressure is always on the quantitative, right? It's test scores, it's meeting standards, it's looking at how a student scored at the beginning of the year and how they score at the mid-year and how they score at the end of the year. That is really difficult when you're trying to look at whether students are building confidence or building up durable skills. And so what we need to do, and this is a real shift in education, we need to redefine what assessment actually means. So instead of assessing students by having them take a test and having their score show how they've mastered a set of standards, right? That they're reading to grade level or they're completing math problems and like all the different things that we did when we were younger. Instead, what about having pitch competitions? Have a student pitch their idea, invite an employer in and have them share the work they do. Go over to a group of students and see how they're collaborating with each other and take notes. And then pull a student over and have them reflect to you how that went. And then give students problems to solve and watch them struggle through it a little bit, because that's part of the journey, right? Is learning how to kind of take risks and disagree with each other and come back and ask for questions and ask for help. Those are all key things, but those are things that are not you can't measure with a test score. And so by really kind of re-envisioning how you assess students is critical. And that is something that I think is really difficult for school districts to kind of keep up with, because for so long we've been so focused on tests and standards.
I think these folks, those are the phenomenal answers, and I think you all in the audience probably have some really strong feelings on that. I think one thing that from our perspective and the work that we're doing that we can share that we see what is coming is that there are a number of states that have created portraits of a graduate that embed a number of these skills into what they want somebody to look like at the end of their experience. And not many of them have built all the rest of what needs to happen to make somebody look like that portrait. So I think that question is also fantastic answers here and a lot of us in the audience to work together to get to that spot. The policy is starting to go that way. Employers are starting to go that way. I don't think school systems have yet decided to go that way. And so I suspect that all of you who are here today are some of the leaders in this work, and you guys are being really thoughtful about this. We'd love to keep in touch on that front as well. We want to hear from educators as much as we want to hear from the employers.
So it's interesting because there is that gap where we don't have the standardized assessments that schools are having to meet, and we don't want to have them. And yet, as long as those still exist, that continues to be the kind of the driving force in where funding is going and in where time is being spent. And so for everyone here, how do we think about, from the district, from the school perspective, starting to make that shift while recognizing that there are still these other pressures that currently have to be met? Do we have to wait for the policy to completely change? Or can we, without adding one more thing, add one more thing?
There are glimmers of hope. So a couple of years ago, the Lucas Education Foundation did a really nice white paper on demonstrating project-based approaches and what it meant for student performance on, of all things, AP history. Now, we could go down a whole rabbit hole. Like, I have strong feelings about AP history and what it does to history. But if we use that as a good example, a proxy for the kind of high-stakes, standardized measure that a lot of our system leaders are being held accountable to hitting, the good news is that students who did a project-based, inquiry-based approach, where they did not simply just teach to the test and cram a lot of facts and do a lot of timed writing, wound up doing just as well on that test as kids who did that, who did a more formal test prep approach. And arguably, I think they probably had, it's easy to imagine that they had a better time doing it. They were more engaged. It was a better use of their time and also their teacher's time. The other model is to use collective action to demonstrate alternatives to those kinds of exams. So I grew up in New York State, where the Regents exam is sort of the coin of the realm. And there is a whole network of schools called the New York State Performance Standards Consortium that have negotiated and demonstrated and using portfolio defenses in lieu of those tests. So I do agree that, like, writ large across all 50 states, there's a whole lot of policy work that needs to happen. But there are really, like, bright spots where people are actually doing the work and showing to the benefit of all of us that it can be done.
Yeah, I think it takes policy a long time to kind of catch up, right? So we need champions in this space, and that means we need district administrators and school leaders who will support these efforts. And one thing too, when you have funding attached to test scores, what often happens is low-income schools are forced to then spend all of their time preparing for tests. And I have this piece of data from a report we did with Burning Glass. I'm just going to kind of read this piece off. But we noticed that the gaps are often twice as large for students in majority Black or African American classrooms, and more than 50% as large for students in majority Latinx classrooms relative to the majority white classrooms. So white students are twice as likely to have more access to durable skills programs or durable skills projects, project-based learning, because test scores are not as much of an issue there, right? And then the gaps are twice to four times as large for classrooms where 75% or more students receive free or reduced lunch compared to classrooms where no more than 25% are program recipients. And so I guess what I'm saying here is the policy does need to catch up too, because if we're tying funding to test scores, then there are different students are having access. There's an opportunity gap to access to these kinds of programs.
Yeah, I would just say that there are amazing bright spots. Again, Blue Valley CAPS, what they're doing, Project Lead the Way is the things that are. There's also really amazing things of individual teachers who are sharing with us how they're embedding this in what's happening. And I think there's not enough of that. I think there needs to be some type of resource or some type of opportunity for teachers to figure out, what do prompts look like, what do things look like in the classroom, because I think they're going to go a long way in trying to advance these things and having their peers look at what they're doing and having the conversations change around, here's our opportunity to make sure that we're providing both the academic and the durable skills that a student's going to need.
Yeah. I'll just throw one more thing out there too, which is, speaking broadly, the path to policy goes through your voting public, which ultimately means it goes through families. It goes through the parents of the kids that you're educating and the families that we're serving in our systems. And we haven't really talked about that today. What is the role of parents in this? How do parents feel about change? Like, what are their own mental models and sort of like affective responses to what school is or what it should be? And I think you have to really take that really seriously and call that out pretty explicitly. The punchline is they're pretty averse to change. And they have a pretty installed base for what school is. And you kind of, anything that's perceived as taking risks with their children presses this kind of lizard brain impulse that all parents have and should have to be protective of their kids. Which is why I think it's pretty encouraging that recently there was some research done by Todd Rose, formerly of Harvard Graduate School of Education, now at Populous, who was basically talking about how parents actually feel about education. And the thing that the insight of that work was to show that most parents actually they want for their kids models that are more personalized, learner-centered, that are not as laser-focused on college preparation, but more on life preparation, including skills that will help their kids get a good job. But they think incorrectly that they are in the minority. So again, most parents would actually prefer this model for their kids, but they think everybody else wants the regular stuff for their kids, so they don't speak up. And when you have that sort of critical mass of parents who actually are open to change, Rose's argument is that it creates an opportunity for cultural shift about what the role of schooling is and education is. And I think that creates kind of a moment of opportunity for us. And I'm going to use us for everybody in the room. You don't come to this event if you're not inspired by change and kind of trying to be a change agent in education. So I think there's a note of optimism amidst all the stuff we're talking about.
One of the things that parents really don't want is for their kids to come home and live in their basement. So I think that there is an opportunity around these durable skills. They're so compelling that in the work that we're doing and in the work that's happening, and when we point to this is being embraced by policymakers, by employers, by parents, by educators. This is a little bit motherhood and apple pie. It's just some of the difficulties that we're going to have coming up against systems or coming up against sort of some resistance to change where we're really having a little bit of the conversations and battles of it in the foreground, but it's not some of those other pieces.
Yeah, there's definitely a communications aspect to this, and that is an opportunity, I think, for schools, districts, educators to think about different ways of talking about what it is that we're all trying to do, because to your point, this will ensure that students aren't coming back home to the basement to live, but we don't necessarily talk about it in a way that makes that so clear. Ashley, I really appreciated you bringing out some of those statistics. It's so important, and we're getting close to time, so as we kind of look towards wrapping up, I think the goal of shifting towards a skills-based hiring model and system is so that we don't recreate the current system of inequity that we have. And there's so many biases built into so many of these systems already. And so I'd love to hear from each of you, what is one thing that you think we should all keep top of mind in ensuring that as we make this collective shift, we don't recreate those inequities?
Listen to young people. So bring them into the conversation. What we have learned is that over 3/4 of Gen Z want to earn the skills, but less than half feel like they have been able to have that opportunity as they're considering pathways. So I mentioned this being this massive educational disruption right now. Young people have been going through it with us, and they have a better idea sometimes than most of the time than we do about what they want and what they need as far as learning about their interests and their skills. And so listen to them and bring them into the conversations. Some of the really strongest school-based programs we've seen have student advisory boards. And they have a budget where students have a little bit of a say over how that is spent as far as what programs take place. And they design project showcases and different things like that. And I think it's really critical now, more than ever, for us to bring young people into the conversation.
Yeah, I would just build on that just a little bit, is make sure the kids have the skills and the lexicon to recognize those skills. I talked to my kids as they were going through and doing a lot of group work, and I was like, what are you learning? And they were like, well, that Johnny is not pulling his weight. And I was like, yeah, you're learning that Johnny's not pulling his weight, but you're learning collaboration, you're learning these other things. And they're like, oh, I thought I was just working in a group. And so I think they need to have those things. The last thing that I will share is an anecdote. We were talking to the hiring manager from FedEx Ground. Leading up into the holidays, they were hiring 10,000 people a month, and they were losing 4,000 people a month. Talk about a churn as you're looking at resumes. He said, prior to the pandemic, I would get a stack of resumes like this. I would get rid of everything that didn't have a 4-year degree, regardless of what the job was, because I could lower the stack of resumes I had to look at down to this, and then I would make my hire. Coming out of the pandemic, I'm only getting a stack of resumes like this. I can't get rid of those resumes that don't have a 4-year degree, but I can't determine who has what skills and who would be good, and which are the good skills, which are the bad skills. Leading skills-based hiring has to lead to skills-based resume writing. We've got to make sure that we equip the kids, the job seekers, middle-aged job seekers, with the terminology and the skills to be able to go get those jobs when we look at skills-based hiring models. And by the way, 6 states have now required that all the state jobs that they hire for are based on skills, not based on a 4-year degree. This is coming.
Yeah, I will borrow from Elliot Washer, who's one of the co-founders of Big Picture Learning, which is a model that I really think the world of. And loosely paraphrased, Elliot has pointed out that too often the purpose of school seems to be to tell kids whether or not they are smart. And what it should be is to help every kid understand how they are smart. And that requires you to have as like a central premise that like all kids are capable of learning. And if we create systems where we wind up ranking and sorting kids, where a certain amount of failure or non-performance is baked into the cake, the problem is the systems, not the kids. So if you believe that we can build school systems that show all kids how they are smart, then I think we'll be in a much better and more equitable place than we are today.
Those were fantastic answers. And I will add, which I think is complementary to everything you all just said, that, and I just lost my thought at exactly that same time. But to your point, every kid has developed at least some of these durable skills. Whether they know it or not, some may think that they're survival skills, right? It's what they had to do. But they are durable skills and they are valuable to employers. So identifying what skills kids already have and giving them the language is something that we can and should be doing, and then we can build from there. I think we are at the end of our time. One of the things that I want to say thank you to all of you for is naming so many different programs and resources. Hopefully everybody was taking notes, or you can go back and rewatch this later on. But there is a lot out there that gives us a lot of hope, a lot of promise for the future and for making this shift. And hopefully this continues this progression. So thank you all so much.